Mr. Verdone, why don't you go ahead, and then we'll go to any questions for either of you.
Good evening. Closer. You got it now? Good evening, members of the panel. My name is John Verdone. I am president of the Sayville Board of Education. I've been a board member since 2003. Sayville has approximately 3,400 students enrolled in our schools. As the panel may know, 48 states and the District of Columbia have adopted the Common Core Learning Standards. My fellow trustees, as well as our superintendent, believes the Common Core Learning Standards have merit. Our community has and will continue to support and maintain and make strides to improve the performance of our students of Sayville. Everyone in our community wants our children to be successful, our teachers, our administrators, our parents. I am proud of the accomplishments of the students of Sayville. 70% of our students are attending four-year schools with over $4.1 million in scholarships. 97% of our students receive Regents Diploma. 45% receive Regents Diplomas with advanced designation. 25% received a Regents Diploma with advanced designation with honors. 49% of our eighth graders met the high school mathematic measures for college and career ready with an 80 or above on the high school algebra exam. 31% of those students met the eighth grade measure. As I was preparing this testimony today, a fellow colleague, a fellow Board of Ed trustee posted something on my Facebook page. I would like to read it. Childhood is not a race to see how quickly a child can read, write, and count. Childhood is a small window of time to learn and develop at the pace which is right for each individual child. Our window with these children is short. We want our children to be successful, lifelong learners. There was no common sense implementation of the Common Core. The state and its lawmakers have rushed its implementation, and by doing so, you have broken the spirit of our children. You have broken the spirit. You have broken the spirit of our teachers. You have broken the spirit of our parents and our administrators. Our children who were once successful are no longer according to the exams. What do we tell these children? What do we tell these parents? What do we tell the teachers and the community? One can understand that why the test out movement is growing in numbers throughout the state, especially after Commissioner King has stated the exams were not true measures of our students or the ability of our teacher. One will have to ask what the purpose of the exams were. Maybe Pearson can answer that question. How can we label a third grader not college or career ready when they do not meet the level of the test makers? What are we doing to our children? Sayville taxpayers have spent approximately $250,000 for scoring, testing, and printing. In addition to the state not taking full responsibility for these costs, the results do not measure anything worthwhile and detracted from the education of our children. As my superintendent earlier, as Dr. Sutton stated earlier, the state should really pick up the cost for these exams and the printing. Furthermore, the state and the federal government held our children for ransom. Unless the state agreed to adopt the Common Core standard, we would not have been eligible for race top funding. Sayville received approximately $16,000 spread over 4 years, 5 buildings. We have spent many, many times that just for its implementation. My fellow Sayville board members and I, as well as board members throughout the state of New York, are elected officials much like yourself. Like you, we're not only accountable to our constituents, but to children and the taxpayers of the community. We know our community. We know what needs to be done. Local control will and continue to play a vital role. We want our children to be successful, much like you. The erosion of local control continues to be a major concern. We need to take a hard and truthful look at the future and what we need to ask ourselves, are we doing what's best for our children? We need to take a truthful look at the harmful impact this initiatives have on all shareholders. I will strongly advocate that school board members have a seat at the table during any discussions of reforms of Common Core. Let's slow down, let's take a breath. We owe it to the most important asset of our community, our children. We need a common sense approach to Common Core. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, and I think you both made an excellent point using your district as an example, because as all these things have been coming down the pike, something that strikes me is we're trying to look at maybe some districts in this state that were underperforming, and we want to get them to where higher performing districts like yours are. And we want to do this and raise them up, not do this. And as you're saying right now, with your district as an example, that's what we're in danger of doing here. We'll get them to have equal performance by dragging everybody down, and that is certainly not what we want for our children in this state. And I thank you for continuing to work with us and being here today, because it is helpful in order to do all these implementations. To me, one of the biggest things lacking is flexibility. If you're a district that's performing well, leave you alone. Sure, there's other districts that we may need to implement things in, but by and large, as we know, we have some very high-performing districts here on Long Island, and we should be giving more flexibility and really looking at what those districts are doing to make their students so successful, rather than hampering them with new regulations and things that are going to unfortunately drag down the performance that they've been so great with. So thank you guys for adding your voices. Assemblyman Graff?
Yeah. We've all talked about Common Core. We understand the philosophy behind it. The implementation of Common Core has just been idiotic and chaotic.
Worse than that, it's been harmful to kids.
Right. And one of the questions I have, what's the morale like as far as your students, your teachers?
My principals, my assistant superintendents, myself are constantly talking teachers off the ledge. The parents are uptight and nervous because their kids are uptight and nervous. They enter the building, and within the first couple weeks, they get hit with tests because we have to pre-test for the APPR. There's also a response to intervention, which actually is a good thing if implemented properly, which we already measure student growth within the confines of the district. So it's already being done. And back to Pearson, another thing I wanted to add with the tests, and certainly you could check into this, these tests are owned, and these questions are owned by Pearson. That's the reason we can't look at them. Pearson can sell these questions to any state. So they're basically being paid by New York State to create tests that they can sell and make more money on.
And we haven't gotten into the data collection on this either. You're also collecting data, from what I understand.
That's correct.
Okay. And there's a cost to that also, with the data collection?
Yes, absolutely.
Right. There was one other question I had. All right, and that's
I
it.
just want to add, I know we talked about the teachers' morale, the administrators' morale. What about the students? What about the students' morale? When they start kindergarten, you want to engage these as soon as the first steps in the door. What are we doing to our children? What are we doing to the classroom? What are we doing, really?
That was part of my question, John. I asked about student morale. But you know what I'm interested in? Has anybody looked at attendance rates for these kids? Has anybody looked and seen, have you had an uptick in absentee students being absent?
I really haven't looked, so I couldn't answer that. In our district, as much as parents are frustrated, they are very, very pro-education, and they're, unless there is a legitimate illness, they're not going to keep their kids home. I think it's more manifested in, the child stating that they don't like school anymore, but, I think they're at a point where, they will attend. Certainly, I'm sure the mental health professional that was here earlier would be a better one to give you a sense of that type of an issue.
All right, if you can get back to me, I'd like to know if there was an uptick, just a little uptick, and I want to see if there's an uptick in the number of kids that are going to the nurse's office, especially during testing and stuff. All right, if you can get back to me, I appreciate it.
That avoidance behavior, I think, would probably be yes.
Okay, thanks.
Andrew Garbarino?
Good afternoon. I have a question. Sayville High School graduate. How many days did the students spend taking tests this year? You know, maybe a third grader.
Which tests?
Well, it's all right. State mandated tests. How many days did they?
You have RTI
Yeah.
that's state mandated. You have APPR that's state mandated, both which have tests, and you have the 3 through 8 testing, which is mandated.
So total.
I would say basically in the middle school level, from the beginning of April until the middle of, beginning of April until almost the end of the school year, you might have 2 weeks that are normal. The rest is testing. Between going from the state tests to the SLO post-tests to the Regents exams and final exams. So, you know, it's constant testing. In high school, again, you have pre-testing, generally midterms is the middle, and that's not much different other than the fact that the Common Core Regents is this year in the beginning of June, and you have algebra students taking 2 Regents exams. Well, the state said they only have to take the Common Core, but you can count the higher of the 2 grades if they take the other one. So, you know, they can say that we're only making you take one, but in reality, they're going to take both because they want to be successful. Elementary level, you have for K1 and 2 and 3, teachers have SLOs, so they have to do pre-test in both math and English. They have to do whatever test they use for Ames Web, not for RTI, which we use Ames Web. Then in mid-year, they'll take a benchmark assessment, either for APR and Ames Web. And then in April, they start the state testing. And basically the month of April is state testing. Then you have to grade those state tests. So those teachers, even though they can't grade their own, it's a consortium, so they have to go grade others. So they're gone for 2-3 days. Then they can start on the final Ames Web to measure student growth, as well as any APPR testing for their SLOs.
That's a lot of tests.
Yeah.
My concern with all those tests, I mean, I went to college and there was a lot of things would come up other than my studies, and so I spent a lot of time cramming for exams because there didn't seem to be enough time. So I would always do well, but it seemed like the retention, you know, for cramming for an exam was not there. I didn't retain a lot of the stuff that I studied. With all of these tests, is there a concern that the students are really just being taught to the test, take the test, and then being taught to the next test, and then there's no retention?
The students really are driven and want to do well. Yeah. And I think when they're given a test that they have absolutely no hope in doing well on, I would say 25% of our students didn't even finish the ELA parts of the state test because they couldn't do it. They get trapped on questions and they want to do well and they want to get it right. Those tests were absolutely useless and just upsetting to kids. The Ames Web is a lot shorter. It's meant to take a snapshot. It's more or less the temperature of the student to see if they're progressing in growth. I think that should be our growth measure, honestly. I don't think the state should be giving us growth measures. We are very capable of doing that ourselves. And obviously the teachers, want to show what their children have learned, and, part of their APPR, it's their livelihood. So there's pressure all over the place. Pressure that, yes, I'm sure there is some teaching to the test. I think the attraction to the modules and domains that the state has put out has shown that, and that's very unfortunate.
Well, I remember from being in Sayville Middle School and Sayville High School that many of the things that I have retained and learned, and a lot of the knowledge didn't come from the things I took on a test. They came from my experiences in the classroom. So I hope that we don't lose that in our students.
You probably remember the debate in 7th grade, Columbus, hero of villain.
I do. But I appreciate you coming here today and testifying. And one thing that I definitely want to follow up on, you mentioned how costly these tests are, but also you mentioned how, that we should follow up, the state should hire someone or to do a study of the effect of these tests on the students' education, because I do think they're possibly, with all these tests and all this pressure, there could be a negative impact, and I think that's something we should definitely, not just the cost, but definitely the effect on the students.
Thank you, gentlemen.